We are now live.
Oh, okay. Well, hello everybody. How are you all doing? Sorry that we weren't around the weekend before last weekend and last week. I would like to be able to give some interesting excuse, but no. Reality is just the schedule wasn't going to work out because yeah, I was like starting to get affected by the winter weather and lack of vitamin D. Some people can put up with that, but for me, there's like a week or so where I can't stay up for more than like 5 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway,
Things are.
so
Yeah. Sorry.
what were you gonna say?
Yeah, I was just gonna say
No,
things have gotten. You can hear me, right?
yeah, I can hear you
Yeah. It's
in the chat.
No, I was just asking you. So, anyways,
All
I
right.
was just gonna add to that. Just say things have gotten pretty exciting where I am, mainly because we got some newborn baby goats. Don't know if you guys want to see pictures in the chat. Let me know, and I can post it on stream. And well, yeah, we had a bit of a drama because the babies weren't nursing initially, but now everything is mostly okay. I say mostly because it's gotten pretty chilly here, and well, yeah, I'm sure things will
And
work out. If they got through the first 24 hours, which they have, then they're already in a much better position than they were initially.
and it's chilly down there too. Fuck, I was looking forward to it being a little warmer. For those who don't know that are watching the stream, when FNet is about to be released, I'm assuming most of you know what FNet is. We're going to meet up IRL, and I don't know if any sort of if any streams are going to come out of that, but
I prefer not. I
um,
prefer there not to be a stream for that. That's just.
that's
I
all
think
right.
it's just gonna be a bunch of guys hanging out together. We don't need to document it at all.
All right. I didn't mean like a stream with a face cam, but like an IRL stream they call those. But anyway, so were we gonna look at the comment section of the video that was uploaded today, or just get straight into the video? We're
Yeah,
not
let's
gonna
go
be
into the
responding.
let's get into the comments section. Actually, let me go ahead and try to shift things around so that people
Yeah.
can
So
see it. This
for
will this
those
will
who
this will be a
haven't
bit,
seen,
so be a little patient. I'm just telling the chat right now.
okay. For those who haven't seen Heretic, well, he finished this video a couple days ago, and he's been writing this essay over the last couple weeks. But we uploaded a video today on the Backalley Philosophy main channel entitled Anarchism and Morality, where Heretic provides basically, I don't know if you'd describe it, a simplified explanation of the NAP from the perspective of Aristotelian virtue ethics, and why that necessarily explains more than looking at it from the naturalist perspective. I think it was a pretty good video. I mean, he could have gone into some more detail, but you know, for his style, it works for what it is. Um,
You do realize
but
the video is
yeah,
not about ethics, right?
it's about morality
Hmm.
and its relationship with virtue ethics.
More along the lines of how
So yeah,
morality works.
yeah.
Okay, let's see if I can't. I can see people in the chat do actually want to see the goats, so
Oh, okay. Sweet.
let me just see if I can't.
I'm kind of interested too.
All right, let's see here. It'll actually take me a bit because I didn't have them saved to my computer. I didn't plan to do this, by the way. So in the meantime, I do have the thing pulled up on screen, and I think I broke something. Oh wait,
The
yeah,
goats
I
or the
did break
comment?
something actually. The goats are on screen. I did that completely accidentally.
All right, but just what I was explaining about the comment section. Heretic was making this video explaining virtue ethics and morality, specifically where morality falls into the virtue ethicist framework. And yeah, it flew over a lot of people's head. I can, for lack of a better way of putting it, I can tell by looking at some of these comments. Um, and it's related to the video that we're going to be responding to today. So I figured we could respond to some of the comments under that video before we start, and get that out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are kind of long. Um, what was that?
Nothing. I was just transition. I'm just starting to transition back over to those comments.
All right. So, do you want to read them off, or like which one are we starting with?
Which one's at the top for you? Because I have it set by top comments, and there's one by face value that says, "Is there a service which only the government has provided throughout history and which only government can provide?" Well, yes, actually, and that is
I'm not
government.
seeing that comment. Hold up. Let me refresh. Let's see. Nope, still not seeing that comment.
Did you sort by top comments?
Sure, let me try that. Oh, the top comment that shows up on my end is tax slave. Uh, Nationalists being enslaved by a foreign government such as the EU is oppression and violates our freedom and independence. Also, nationalists being enslaved by the national government isn't oppression; it makes us free.
And this is I haven't actually like studied these comments in any great detail, but I did find it greatly amusing how many people are actually calling out Yaron for his inability to rub two neurons together. I'll just say that.
Oh, I
But
was okay. Well, that's probably the issue. Is you're looking at Yaron's comment section. I was talking about the comment section for anarchism and morality.
oh, okay. That's what we were looking at completely different videos then. Crap.
It's fine. I'd imagine that it's not much different. I was only intending on responding to a few of them under our under your video anyway. I mean that's why I started off by talking about your video, and I thought we were on the same page there. But oh well, there's a miscommunication. Sorry, chat. But yeah, so in relation to your video, I wanted to sort of, well, there's a couple of comments that are all essentially asking the same question, or if it's posited in the form of an argument, making the same argument. But I wanted to respond to this because it's related to Yaron's philosophy as an objectivist and his response to anarchy. But yeah, so a lot of people didn't, because I guess you didn't focus much on explaining the ethical side of it, and I'd imagine some of these people may not have seen my video, "What is the Alliance of the Libertarian Left," where I explain the entailments of ethics from the virtue ethicist perspective. Um, it like they didn't sort of put it together right away that we're talking about virtue ethics, and it seems like a lot of these people don't understand that perspective. So we got a lot of people who think that the is-ought argument is an argument against ethical philosophy, even though it's not.
I mean,
Like even
I talked about that. I didn't say is ought specifically, but I did address that by pointing out, I think 3 times actually in the video, that ethics claims nothing about how people ought to behave. So, in all honesty, I'm genuinely concerned that there are people who, for one reason or another, are unwilling to examine ethics except except from the understanding that all ethical claims make ought claims about how people should behave.
yeah, and that was my first. That was sort of my first question is why exactly are they positing that as though it's a response? Because at from my upon my recollection, it was at least twice you made that specific claim. You, or at least you pointed out, ethics are not prescriptive claims about how people act, how people ought to act, how people ought to internalize information, or how they ought to interact with others around them. It's a social science, or at least the virtue ethicist approaches it. It Virtue ethicists would consider ethics to be a type of would be to be a type of philosophy that studied from the perspective of a social science. So, starting by assuming that methodological dualism is a valid concept. Well, not by assuming, but obviously you can't treat social sciences as though they're supposed to be studied from a normative perspective, because they rely specifically on emergent properties that are unknowable in advance, because what happens is the result of people interacting with one another, or how people internalize their environment, etc. So you have to create your principles based on sort of what counts as a certain thing, or from the perspective of an observer, I guess, for another way of putting it.
Hmm.
But yeah, this is something you explained multiple times, or at least you pointed it out multiple times. And only one of the comments that stood out to me seems to acknowledge that, and they just say, "Well, that's a radical redefinition of ethics." The specific commenter that said that. Sorry if that came off like I was. If you didn't like the tone, if you happen to be watching the stream, but it's really not. In fact, the moral naturalist interpretation of ethics is newer than virtue ethics. And assuming virtue ethics didn't have the sort of rich tradition that it does, we're not arguing based on how people have defined it. Definitions are not scientific, because they only describe concepts. They don't explain why they are, what they entail, how something functions, etc. So, um, when we're putting forward this idea, assuming that this was completely unprecedented, that's just not an argument, because what we're arguing is that this is a better way of approaching ethics. Because, firstly, as I've noted, if you're going to start off by assuming that ethical concepts are prescriptive, ethics being the area of philosophy which deals with attempting to explain um, conceptually what would be a justified way of people associating with one another and how they can interact with one another in consistent ways. Um, if we were to assume that this was prescriptive, that itself would turn it. So if we were to approach that from the naturalist perspective, one of my major criticisms with the moral naturalist perspective is that it's actually it's a cleverly disguised type of ethical relativism, because within that framework, which is based on either deontology or inductive logic, um, there's no focus put on explaining why things like property, violence, coercion, duress, or all these concepts within ethical philosophy. There's no necessary reason from these perspectives for explaining having to explain why these things are what they are, or what makes something property, duress, etc. And because of that, you could say that anything is property, anything is duress, and you would have an equal claim with anybody else who would make that argument, and you'd have no way of challenging them. Therefore, um, therefore, concepts in ethical philosophy don't have any sort of coherent, tangible nature to them from the moral naturalist perspective. They're abstracts. As a result, that's a type of relativism.
The example I like to make when making this point is you have a dispute between a woman and a man. The woman says the man raped her, and thus she is entitled to compensation for the damage that was done to her. The man admits that he raped her, however, argues that because she tried to resist his attempts to force himself against her against her will, that he is entitled to compensation from her. How can you possibly tell who is right in any sense in a relativist framework except arbitrarily?
Right. And I'm sure that a lot of the Kantian or naturalist types in general would be reading like crazy at me, arguing that they're actually putting forward a type of relativism. Pardon the redundancy there, but yeah, that it really is just from, if you're an egoist or a consequentialist arguing against Kantians or deontologists, it really is just a way of framing relativism, arguing against another way of framing relativism, but framing relativism as though it provides objective answers in ethical philosophy.
hmm
Um, but even with that aside, the point that I was making though is this is the better way of approaching ethical philosophy, because also within ethical philosophy, it clearly would be a type of social science if you were to apply the dualist methodology consistently, because what you're studying is not how people process information or how they act upon, or specifically how each individual person acts, but just you're putting forward principles and claims about like what would be justified in how people interact with one another and why that's the case. So I've likened it a couple of different times to how the Austrians study economic theory, but that's how virtue ethicists approach the concept of ethics. And when you look at it from that perspective, it clearly explains a lot more. For one, the most obvious reason, the most obvious way in which it's superior in explanatory power is the is-ought gap goes away, because you're not making prescriptive claims. But also, it's you're not actually there doesn't really seem to be any sort of logical connection to begin with between just arguing what's right and how people act. But also, if you're looking at it from the virtue ethicist perspective, you look at things like the state and the state's political partners as barriers to entry for people being able to consistently live in an ethical society. Because when you have things like a monopoly on security, that makes it so certain parties are going to be able to act necessarily at a different standard than other actors in the society, and they can do this on a sort of systematic basis. So it has implications for it definitely has implications for what ethical outcomes are, for sure. It causes you to focus on what's entailed by these ethical concepts, and it frames an ethical society as an outcome as a result of these sorts of barriers to entry, like the monopoly on security, being undermined entirely, and all the state's political partners being undermined. So it creates sort of a direct correlation between economic competition and the consistency of the NAP in society. I think that we've gone on about this enough.
Yeah. I mean, right now we're 22 minutes into the stream. So
I'm kind
also I
of just
DM'd you
delaying
the
the inevitable.
yeah, pretty much, and I also
See that.
DM'd you the picture of the goats that I showed on stream because you can't see it.
Yeah. Nice small icons of sin.
That's what they are.
But
Anyways,
anyway, so on to the Yaron Brooks video. It's tangentially related because Yaron Brooks he's an objectivist commentator. I'm not sure if he has like a radio show, podcast. I know that he's debated with Tom Woods before, but he has some pretty spicy takes about libertarianism and anarchy in particular.
and for reasons that we'll get
He,
into shortly, I'm wondering if anyone knows what Yaron Brooks' view on abortion is. I have a feeling I know what it is, and that's going to make one of the views that he holds about anarchism to be particularly spicy. So, anyways, I'm just going to hit play now. Let's begin.
Interested in the point you raised
we
about
can't
anarchism. What do you make of
explain what's happening here? I wanted to explain some of the things you said about anarchy. Like he's said that it's an anti-human philosophy, and he's stated before that he doesn't knowingly debate with anarchists about anarchism. He had to posit that because obviously he debated with Tom Woods, and he claims he didn't know Tom Woods was an anarchist. Which, I mean, wow, you're gonna debate with somebody, and especially with Tom Woods, it's sort of one of the things he's the most open about, even though he's a filthy Hoppian. I'll take that for what you will, but he's a self-proclaimed libertarian and anarchist. I mean, he didn't do any research about his views at all, and of course he got absolutely stomped by Tom Woods. I think the debate was about American history, but because something Yaron Brooks has defended, he's exactly like Ayn Rand in essentially everything that he argues. He's defended the Trail of Tears policy, for instance,
For those of you who aren't aware, the Trail of Tears was a series of territorial expansions by the United States government that forced Native Americans off of land and territory that they had held for generations and had a superior legitimate claim to that land because their ancestors had homesteaded it and that they had that had been passed down to them for generations. Now, there is certainly a very strong case to be made that the territory that they might have existed at any one point, at that particular point in time, may not have actually been theirs, because, as I'm sure you're aware, Native Americans, even prior to European colonial expansion, were at war with each other constantly, and this has been going on for thousands of years. But that said, they still had a superior claim to it than the United States American government. So it goes without saying that the Trail of Tears was, and the territorial expansion that had occurred at the time that caused the Trail of Tears to exist in the first place was entirely illegitimate. But he defends it, and I imagine that he follows the Randian justification for why it's okay for the Native Americans to have gotten stomped in the first place, and that's just because the American government was superior.
He's also, on numerous occasions, defended the bombings of Japan during World War II. He and he does all of this while claiming to be a skeptic of state power, by the way. But perhaps more interestingly, his basis for not wanting to debate anarchy is that he considers debate to be an endorsement of the ideas of his opponents. Now, I don't know if he really thought through that excuse, but he's debated Marx, Leninists, and actual fascists before.
Well, I mean,
so I'm gonna go. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and assume that probably was just a hastily slapped together excuse for why he doesn't have to, in real time, defend the arguments you're about to hear right now to somebody who actually is a proponent of these ideas. But yeah, I haven't seen too much about. I haven't seen too much of Yaron Brook's content, admittedly, but every once in a while somebody posts a video of his in the Discord, and this was another instance of that, and this guy is a boob.
Mm-hmm. Now, I was just going to address the thing about him debating Marxists, Leninists, and fascists. I can see why he would actually be consistent in his view that debate would be endorsement, and therefore he is subtly implying that he would be endorsing views that he would otherwise characterize as repugnant, because fundamentally they all share the same presupposition, and that is that the state is legitimate and that the state ought to prescribe certain views onto society through the point of a gun. What Yaron Brook does not want to endorse is the belief that the state is illegitimate and that people ought to be free to decide for themselves what is and are their most highly valued preferences. That, I think, is what he is trying to avoid. Maybe not consciously, but at least that's how it communicates to me. Sure, as I said before, you can give them the benefit of the doubt, but honestly, I'm past the point of giving people the benefit of the doubt, because whether or not they're stupid or disingenuous, I honestly don't think it makes much of a difference.
Yeah, well, at least as far as Yaron Brooks' attitude towards debating anarchy, he is absolutely being consciously disingenuous, and that's really sad, especially for somebody who is as well, or at least claims to be as well read as he is. I mean, I think he is an actual academic, like, don't quote me on that, but if that's the case, then this guy has students who are learning this crap.
I'm not. You have dead air because I'm just trying to process that and figure out how to make a response to the very idea that people would take what he says seriously. Unfortunately, I do know that they exist, but I mean, I also saw the like-dislike ratio on his video, which, although it's not terrible, it's not as good as it could be, and the views on this video, well, let's just say that despite having a subscriber count like 8 to 9 to 10 times higher than the Backalley's, his videos get basically the same amount of views ours get. And
that's pretty bad. I just took a look right now because you mentioned it.
It's not Dapperton bad, but it's still a big oof.
Yeah, for sure. Anyway, let's get started here.
All right. Now, I hadn't watched the video yet, so I don't know what to expect other than what it says in the title, so I have a few ideas what to expect, but let's begin.
Interested in the point you raised about anarchy there. What do you make of Anarcho-capitalism as a philosophical movement, as it was promulgated by people like Rothbard? Do you think that the idea of a stateless society driven by property rights, markets, that some libertarians in America would very much like to become reality still, is simply implausible or more fundamentally undesirable in some way?
It's fundamentally undesirable because but it's a mythology. It's pretense.
That's actually one of the first things that we should know, how this is being framed. Undesirable. So right off the bat, it's being framed within a perspective where no meaningful discussion can be had between the nuances of libertarianism and how libertarians approach attempting to look at organization and politics, and the perspective that argues positively for political authority, because libertarians are fundamentally making a claim of truth about reality, whereas the political perspective, the authoritarian perspective, looks at different types of ways in which society could be organized as just different policy plans that are carried out and enforced by the state. We're not Heretic and I are not arguing necessarily that libertarianism is desirable or undesirable, because libertarianism is just sort of the absence of the state. We're arguing that it's true. It's kind of incoherent to put it in the perspective as something that's desirable or undesirable, because it's, I mean, whether or not it is or isn't is kind of irrelevant. It's just whether or not that is how societies organize, or whether or not the state is something that can justify itself. That's not a matter of preference. That's a matter of either a true or false statement.
Imagine, like, I'm thinking about this, and just substitute anything or any reference to anarchism or anarcho-capitalism. Not to say it's synonymous, but just follow me on this one. Replace all instances of anarchism with a certain car brand. Like, let's say Audi, for instance. Yaron, can you please tell us why Audi cars are undesirable? Can you please tell us why Honda cars are undesirable? Can you please tell us why McDonald's is undesirable? Can you please tell us why grinding your face into the concrete is undesirable? No position that you can possibly make on any of these issues could possibly constitute a truth statement. Everything here is just like them trying way too hard to put way too much emphasis on something that they would openly acknowledge to be just their opinion, that is no more or less valid than any other. In order to respond to this, all I have to do is just say, well, I find anarchism desirable, and they have literally no ability to refute me. In fact, we can even go one step further and state that anarchism is universally desirable, and this is a true statement, and they would have no ability to refute that whatsoever. After all conclusions are equally valid, aren't they?
Yeah, and that's, I guess this is another way of looking at relativism in these areas of philosophy. Is it's sort of, it's like the opposite of the is-ought problem. It's the same issue. It's just that they're instead of making is statements and trying to argue that there's necessarily an ought derived from an is statement, they're making ought statements and not even trying to justify why that is a valid concept or a valid methodology. And that's sort of the biggest sin of relativism from at least my perspective, and I'm sure you would agree. Things, even if we're talking about preferences or things which don't have to have truth statements, we have to at least have an explanation of why it is that they don't require explanations. And for things that do require natural, our attempts to make observations, I don't even know how you could claim that you're observing something unless you have an explanation for it
Mm-hmm.
and necessarily why it's true. That's why I say it's not only preposterous, but it's actively anti-scientific. Relativist views are, because relativist views, as you put it, specifically attempt to put forward the idea that conclusions can just exist in a vacuum, and that every explanation is equal in terms of explanatory power. And I'm aware that people who put forward types of relativism don't really believe that, because obviously nobody uses Harry Potter as a source to learn chemistry from. But if we were to try and take relativism at its face, I mean, why wouldn't a Harry Potter book be equal as an explanation for how chemistry works?
I mean, I disagree. I think that Harry Potter could actually be seen as a prophecy and should be regarded as a holy textbook delivered unto us from the future by our great Lord and Savior Gandalf. I know Gandalf doesn't appear in the Harry Potter series, but he does now. And because relativism puts all conclusions as equally valid, I think we should take the words of the prophet Luke Skywalker also at face value as well. Praise whoever happens to be standing in front of me right now.
Prequels are a better way to learn about biology than biology textbooks, according to relativism.
Yes. I mean, it feels like you ever see like those bad history memes where it shows a historical figure saying something ridiculous and the quote is attributed to someone completely different. Like you have Albert Einstein saying something very silly and it's attributed to Mark Twain.
Not every quote that you read on the internet is real. Albert Einstein.
Yeah, exactly. And this is just to illustrate like just how ridiculous it is. But I regard the inherent disingenuity of relativism to be its greatest sin. And I know you know what I'm talking about, where when they posit something that they know to be untrue, as though it were truth, it tells me that they're lying to me. I mean, it doesn't tell me anything because I know they're lying to me. And honestly, like when I'm involved in a serious philosophical discussion, I'm really interested in learning the truth. I want to be wrong because it means that I conform more to what is true than what isn't. And I am perfectly happy, well maybe not perfectly happy, but I am willing to see or accept arguments and ideas that I may not have even considered yet, But these guys just throw that out the window and just presuppose their conclusions. And then when called out on their inability to prove anything that they say, they just default to, well, that's just my opinion, man. But then why are you telling me? I didn't ask for your opinion. I asked for your facts. I asked for your reasons. I don't want to waste my time with you, yet you insist on wasting my time. That's what drives me up the wall the most, by far.
Yeah, for sure. And it seems as though, at least I'm sure this isn't the case with all relativists, but it seems as though when talking to people like Finn Tranot would be a great example. They know full well that what they're saying is bullshit, and yeah, you have to be a skilled mental fencer to catch some of the rhetorical tricks these people use.
Mm-hmm. It's and once you start to pick up on it, it just becomes blatantly obvious.
Just what I was going to say about that is, yeah, it irritates me because some of these people I've encountered, because I know as a matter of fact that they, at the very least, in their own sort of the way that they look at what they're like, even I know that they don't know what they're arguing is true or a valid position, because I've seen them actively express knowledge of the problems with that argument, or people pointing out the problems with their arguments. People have done that previously, and they just kind of ignore it in later conversations without ever actually addressing it. So it comes off as actively predatory past a certain point. It just seems like they're putting this forward towards people that they think aren't going to be able to catch it, and might be swayed over to this position just because the person making this argument thinks that they're not going to be able to have the argumentative skills to be able to handle it.
Mm-hmm. I've seen it before, and I think that it's easily one of the most subversive influences in libertarianism at the moment, along with Hoppianism.
In general, I'd say in the sciences in general, because there are a lot of methodologies in sciences overall that rely on relativism, but are very cleverly disguised so that they don't, from a superficial perspective, appear to be making relativistic claims. Like any type of epistemology that's based on Platonic logic would fall into that category, for instance.
Mm-hmm. And just to answer a question in the comments, what does relativism have to do with Yaron Brook? The question was put forward to Yaron Brook what he thinks about anarcho-capitalism and why he considers it to be undesirable, which admittedly is a little bit of a semantics issue, but the terms he's using is also incredibly important. We talked about this earlier, where if something is quote unquote, if something is to be, or if a certain philosophical position is to be accepted or refuted on the basis of its desirability, then you're not really in the realm of truth and knowledge. You're in the realm of preferences. And, well, it doesn't, when you're in the realm of preferences, you're not, all conclusions are going to be equally valid. And that's the position, that's the relativist position that we were talking about earlier. And that's why this is important. You probably only just joined the stream, so that's probably why you missed the context.
Oh, yeah, we were talking about that for the last 45 minutes now, but also Yaron Brook is an objectivist type. And yeah, so follower of Ayn Rand's philosophy, and a lot of his methodological views are going to be based on her particular slant on egoism, which for those who aren't familiar with rational egoism, do you want to explain heretic?
I'm sorry, repeat that one more time. I was looking away.
For those who aren't familiar with rational egoism, would you like to explain what that is, heretic?
I'm sorry, I'm blanking at the moment. Could you explain it?
So rational egoism is essentially an attempt. It's an attempt to reconcile. Well, it's sort of as it sounds. It's an attempt to reconcile the rationalist framework, which is the framework essentially within within the scientific methodologies that would argue that determining truth is based inherently on a priori reasoning. It's an attempt to reconcile the differences between the rationalistic framework and the egoist approach to the social sciences in particular, which we just spent several minutes ranting about. I mean, there's a bit more nuance to it, which I'm admittedly not well brushed up on off the top of my head. But you see, that's kind of the problem with these sorts of frameworks, is that because it relies on relativism, it's essentially just making a claim, but not ever actually substantiating that claim. So, I mean, I see it as a type of it's egoism, and therefore that's really all you need to know about it.
Mm-hmm. I feel like it's going to fall into the same category as compatibilism is with the determinism free will debate, where they're attempting desperately to reconcile two mutually exclusive ideas into a single incoherent whole that somehow its followers claim to reconcile, but it actually doesn't at all.
Yeah, I think that would probably be a good way to put it, because rational egoism attempts to do this with areas of study such as ethical philosophy and epistemology. So you could argue that there are a lot of similarities between quote unquote rational egoism and compatibilism, but because because determinism is tautological and isn't it because it's tautological and because it doesn't place emphasis on actually explaining why things are the way they are. It just sort of acts as though conclusions exist in a vacuum, and whenever something happens, that's just it being revealed. Because that's actively anti-scientific, it can't be reconciled with attempts to explain why things are the way they are. You can compare it to egoism in that regard, because egoism does the exact same thing for the social sciences and for logic and methodology in general.
All right, and we have people in the chat telling us to continue the video, so let's go.
Sorry about that. We got God, we spent like 15 minutes on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we got carried away. Apologies.
Continuing.
It's a rationalistic construction that cannot exist, metaphysically cannot exist. Let's start with anarcho-capitalism. You can't have, those are contradictions in terms. Anarchism is the negation of capitalism. Anarchism is the negation of property rights. Property rights.
Is he taking the Marxist redefinition of anarchism at face value? That sounds like that's exactly what he's putting forward, that anarchism is just not capitalism, in which case that begs the question, what is capitalism? But that's going to be going into the topic of capitalism as an anti-concept, which honestly I'm getting a little bored going into that on these
Yeah.
streams. But I think all I'll say is that prior to, say, the mercantilist era, can be reasonably inferred as not being capitalist. So therefore, we would have to accept absolute monarchism as anarchist. We have to accept feudalism as anarchist, which I'm sure that the Marxists who call themselves Hoppians would be more than happy to accept. That we have to accept tribal governments as anarchist, and we'd have to accept. Actually, we don't even have to go into history. Just go into uh, a lot of authoritarian collectivist governments as anarchist. The Soviet Union was anarchist. North Korea is anarchist.
I got to admit, I'm sort of on the same boat as you are. The capitalism is an anti-concept debate is just fucking boring to me at this point, because it pretty much any time we write a video that has anything to do with the concept or responds to anybody on a stream that is talking about the concept of capitalism, I mean, it's kind of a necessary thing to point out, because capitalism is such an incoherent thing that doesn't really have any tangible parameters. But it is, yeah, I wish people would just kind of would stop it. Maybe I don't know. We'd have to think of a way around that, but I agree with you. It's getting very tiring to have to repeat myself over and over again.
Mm-hmm. But I think I made my point, at least, that the definition that anarchism is just when you don't have capitalism is, even if capitalism did have a clear set definition, fundamentally incoherent.
Yeah, I could just sort of paraphrase the objectivist view, or at least the Randian view of the state, markets, and quote unquote capitalism, but he's about to, so we can continue, I guess.
Sorry, I just saw this comment. Now I have boomer noises from Left 4 Dead playing in my head in response to Yaron Brook being a.
I saw that in the Discord the other day. Is that like a new meme? Boomer noises.
Maybe. I mean, I've been seeing it every now and then, but I think it's pretty funny. And I think eventually we got to do a response video to a particularly cringy boomer and just replace all of the sounds he makes with just random boomer noises from Left 4 Dead.
Oh god.
It'll probably just be a meme video. Anyways, continuing.
Property rights need an enforcement mechanism. You have to be able to enforce property rights, and that enforcement mechanism is government.
Imagine believing that you need government to enforce property rights, which there's a lot of problems with that statement, but I think the main thing I'm thinking of right now is that people are incapable of defending themselves without government. That people are just completely helpless little newborn lambs that are just utterly defenseless and completely unable to defend themselves against aggressors. They are completely capable and competent to aggress against other people, but the moment that someone threatens them, they're just completely disarmed. They're helpless.
Yeah, now I'm hoping all of you see why talking about virtue ethics and sort of laying the groundwork for that at the beginning of the stream was necessary, because that in large part is going to explain what's wrong with how Yaron Brook is approaching the concept of law, so to speak.
Sorry, I'm just going to go into that. Property rights are entailed by self-ownership as an extension of people's labor. So when I said that people would be unable to defend themselves, in response to a comment about property rights, there is a parallel because people defending their own property constitutes a defense of themselves. So naturally, people would be able to defend their own property. But that's the language I'm using is also very deliberate. Defense. You don't need to enforce people's claims to themselves. They can already demonstrate it, and arguably more importantly, they can defend themselves as well. They can, regardless of what Yaron Brook says, that some great and almighty overlord needs to give people permission to be able to defend themselves. And thus you have defense, or you just have people who are only exist to defend other people. And these people are hired by the overlord.
Yeah, this is why it's important to make the distinction between making a claim. This is what I was going to say earlier. Between making a claim about what is right in terms of defending yourself or making a claim, and actually making that claim or acting upon or against another person, sort of what would be conceptually justified there. Because if you attempt to conflate those things, another problem that you're presented with is the sort of disconnect from lived reality that is you being unable to establish property without some sort of organization arbitrarily dictating what property is. So, and there's a sort of, there would be a paradox there. If the organization that is supposedly allowing you to do that or making it so you can do that is the only way that you can define property and defend property, then property claims are arbitrary, but property claims are founded upon acting upon resources. So yeah, there's a from that perspective, there's an inconsistency there. But yeah, this is I think this might trigger some people in the audience, but I think Proudhon probably put it best, and this isn't really a disconnect from the sort of the mainstream libertarian, not mainstream, but the way that the libertarian philosophy has been expanded upon by Rothbard and the modern movement is that because of the state's monopoly on security and monopoly in arbitration, specifically because of that, you have disorder, and you make it so property and who claims property, what counts as property. All of this is fundamentally decided by one organization, which can't be challenged. And specifically because of that, there's no way to have any consistent standard of property. You can get your property seized from you and nothing would happen to anyone who does that if the state decides not to do anything. In fact, the state would defend them from you if you tried to defend your property, and the state decided that the state declared that you couldn't do anything about it from their own so-called legal framework.
Everything that you can claim to be your property in a statist society is fundamentally only what the state allows you to possess. And even then, it's incredibly dependent on legislative decree. And if you happen to be unlucky, then if you run afoul of it, then they can take it for any reason they see fit at any point, just simply because they can, and then give themselves the quote unquote legitimacy to be able to take it in the first place, such that you have no recourse against your own victimization. With this in mind, can you even say in a statist society that you have property rights at all? Or is this just some gross facsimile that tricks gullible people, such as objectivists, into believing that a state is the only way by which property rights can be maintained?
Well, no, you can't have I mean, you have you have property rights regardless of whether or not the state exists. I mean, you always have your rights. It's just as long as the state exists, your ability to claim property and defend that property is going to be non-existent unless you have the ability to defend yourself from the state. Because if the state is going to claim that you don't have a right to a property claim, or if the state going to isn't going to give you a title, or they're not going to recognize your claim, then the state's going to actively aggress against you, or is going to prevent people from helping you defend yourself against other aggressors. Now, that's assuming you can't defend yourself. But if you tried to defend yourself against somebody aggressing against your property, the state would side with the person aggressing against you, because the state wouldn't recognize that you have a valid claim there.
Mm-hmm. Anyways,
So
I think we should continue.
But just, yeah, their entire, we should continue, but the entire objectivist point about you needing a monopoly on security, monopoly in arbitration, a political infrastructure to have property, that's entirely backwards. Because you have it, there isn't any sort of consistent standard of property outside of just what the state decrees.
Mm-hmm. Anyways,
let's continue.
Yeah.
If everybody is trying to enforce their own property rights, then ultimately there's no mechanism by which we arbitrate disputes. The mechanism that they present of private courts and private armies defaults to civil war, defaults to, because you've given different entities the ability to define property rights in different ways over the same territory, over the same property. How do
That's not how property works.
He has a very I have a feeling he's just projecting statism onto anarchist ideas. It goes without saying that I've been meaning to say this earlier, but we're not anarcho-capitalists. We have a lot of criticism with traditional anarcho-capitalism, and as such, we've issued the term to describe our beliefs altogether. But this said, like, all of his arguments do apply to anarchism in general, so it is worth addressing. But that said, I think his understanding of anarchism is just basically, it would be just a bunch of little tiny states all fighting against one another, which is to say it's going to be a whole bunch of tiny monopolies on arbitration, which of course makes perfect sense for the simple reason that monopolies on arbitration have a tendency to, or when you have a monopoly just in general, it cannot be maintained through civil discourse, and as such they have a direct incentive to use violence as a means to maintain their power and maintain their monopoly and to keep out any competitors. With this in mind, yeah, if your model of society is just a whole bunch of really tiny states, that's likely what's going to happen. Fortunately, that's not what anarchists propose whatsoever. It's entirely these civil wars are just entirely a function of people not being able to achieve their most highly valued preferences or because the government is in the way. So the only way they can possibly conceive of it is to seize the levers of power for themselves to achieve their own marginal interests at the cost of another group that is equally as militant in either making sure that the other side is completely opposed, or because they have their own set of preferences that the initial side is rivalrous against. With this in mind, you're going to end up with a situation where only one side can possibly win, and you're not going to end up with what would actually happen under anarchism, which is a marketplace of mutual exchange where people are going to have differences, but because just about everyone is going to be able to achieve their own interests individually without having to impose a cost on any other one person, what you're going to achieve is essentially an asynchronous harmony.
Yeah, I'm glad that you caught that as well. That's something that a lot of that's something that's really disingenuous that a lot of statists do when attempting to criticize anarchy is they will attempt to characterize any society in the absence of a state as being sort of uh, prescribed by one model. For instance, if you're talking about fire departments in the absence of a state, well, obviously, fire departments can only operate around a model where if you call them up, you have to give them your credit card first, because, of course, that makes them inefficient and would create problems. And, of course, nobody could work around that. But yeah, what's interesting about how Yaron characterizes arbitration in the absence of a state is that arbiters would be setting the standards for property. The only reason arbiters can decide what property is now, the only reason that property is treated as a norm rather than a principle is because there's only one arbiter and it has a monopoly on security. So it can decide not only what claims are valid, but it can decide that things which wouldn't even be considered property, like IP, are now treated as property claims.
Oh God, that's another thing that the objectivists are just absolutely cancerous on.
Yeah, for sure. But all that I was gonna add to that is, an arbiter is not necessarily a private organization that you have to go to if something goes wrong. No, it can be just somebody on your street that both people in the dispute happen to, value the judgments of. It can be, but if two people in a single household have a dispute and they look up to somebody in the household economy as being as their word having value, they can go to that person. There are arbitration is more nuanced than most models in an economy, so it's kind of laughable that he would attempt to characterize it as being just one model. I mean, private arbitration doesn't even describe a particular model. Like, what are you even talking about? Chieftains? Are you talking about like a Walmart corporation? Like what?
Well, I
There's a
mean,
lot of gray area there.
I mean, it doesn't help that you have the likes of David Friedman, who thinks that an anarchist society would just be like modern society, but all of the services are just controlled by a government. Or not, sorry, I misspoke. All the services are just controlled by a private company. So if you did have a major dispute, you would go to a courtroom that was just run by, I don't know, Walmart. And he kind of imagines that there'd just be there would just be Walmart's and little like smaller proprietary arbitration agencies.
Would go to your Mick Judge and they would sentence you to death for not buying enough Big Macs.
Okay, Hamburglar.
Anyway, should we continue?
For a moment, we have someone in the comments who was actually surprised at my comment when I said that we're not anarcho-capitalists, and he's like, "What? What are you? What are you guys then?" And someone replied, "They're agorists," meaning us. And he's asking, "What is agorist?"
Well, do you want to explain that?
Yeah, sure. It's a conceptual refutation of the state's mere existence, and as well as a. I'm trying to figure out how the best way to put this into words. Basically, it's a refutation of the state's mere existence and a strategy to dismantle the state through counter-economics.
It's not a strategy as much as it is an approach to the NAP. And this is sort of what we were talking about earlier with virtue ethics. NCAPs are at best agnostic on the question of sort of what informs ethics and sort of what their view on ethics and property is. And I think that's kind of concerning because, as I pointed out, if you don't have any idea of what informs your view of these things, like what is a property claim, why, then that makes property arbitrary. That makes ethical claims arbitrary. And the way that virtue ethicists would approach the concept is that the NAP is a conclusion of all of these sort of entailed positions, which inform our views on ethics, moral agency, and all of this can be tied back to conceptual logic. Now, so we wouldn't disagree fundamentally with like the typical Rothbardian view. It's just that our idea of what that entails is different. Because where Rothbardians they just sort of look at their conclusion as though it exists in a vacuum, and that sort of dictates how people could or ought to act. We see it as a conclusion that we achieve by subverting the state and by making it so the things that would allow the state to continue existing don't exist. So we have sort of a necessarily dialectical view of state power and what allows the state to exist. And there's also more nuance in the economic side as well. For instance, agorists are because of that, agorists are critical of models of organization that need to be held up by the state externalizing their maintenance costs in order to exist, like wage labor, for instance, or organizational hierarchies. You wouldn't be skeptical of those on ethical grounds. Like there's nothing unethical there, but considering that in modern society, the reason why they're present is because the state sets up barriers to entry that forces people to invest their resources into those things because they would be harassed if they pursued their most highly valued preferences elsewhere. We would have a reason as Austro-libertarians to be skeptical of those models.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's also just the concept of political economy itself. Every neighborhood, every household has a different economy. So it seems kind of strange to, even if we were to take capitalism as a concept at face value, it seems kind of strange to be characterizing a society by one model of organization or one sort of economy, which is what the term capitalism, one of the few things that it concretely implies. But then there's also, and this may not necessarily be the case with all agorists, but Heretic and I also because of the concept of right-of-way, would be skeptical of the concept of capitalism as well, in that a free market, a stateless society with a free market would have commons, by which commons are resources where it's impossible for one party or one organization to exclusively claim them without engaging in active aggression against another party's property. So, for instance, if you tried to exclusively claim the roads around somebody's house, and then you tried to use force to stop them from leaving their property or tried to act upon their existing property, that would run into conflict with property rights. So the only real way around that would be for the roads to be existing in a state of null ownership. Now, to clarify, we're not talking about one organization collectively owning it. That's sort of the same problem, just framed differently. It's that nobody would be able to ethically claim that without aggressing against somebody else, which is something that deviates from the typical ANCAP view as well.
Mm-hmm. Typically, they go for the position of total private property, where every square inch is privately owned, and they don't accept anything otherwise, and they can't even conceive that the commons could possibly be legitimate. Of course, the roads are an excellent example of both historically and in modernity areas of territory that where no one person or no one party can claim exclusive ownership to, because, well, everyone uses it. Everyone will have more or less an equal claim to it. So, yeah, unless you're the only one that uses that road, for example, a driveway, then you don't really have any legitimate justification for claiming that road. Now, with this in mind, I think we should continue.
Yeah, for sure.
The dispute. They can go to court, but why bother? If I have a bigger weapon than you, why would I go to court? I'll just take you over and impose my view on you. So it is a system that devolves into a Hobbesian everybody against everybody, all men against all men, and it revolves into violence. So,
He assumes that the Hobbesian state of nature is even remotely valid observation.
Yeah. Even assuming that his characterization of security and arbitration in the absence of a state was valid, hasn't demonstrated why violence would necessarily ensue.
Well,
so even within his own internal reasoning, there's sort of a gap there that he hasn't explained.
I can't really blame him for not explaining, because one, he's kind of going over this pretty briefly, going over it quickly, so he's not really going to be explaining. And secondly, Hobbes didn't explain either. He kind of just assumed that people will necessarily just resort to violence if they can't achieve cooperation, and they won't, not want to be killed and infer that the other person doesn't want to be killed, and therefore act accordingly. We can pretty quickly, just purely through reason, recognize that although cooperation is in people's mutual best interests, most people aren't always going to want to cooperate, either because they just don't like each other, they don't have resources the other person doesn't like, but violence is going to be very quickly figured out to not be violence is very quickly going to be figured out to not be in people's mutual best interest. And with that alone, we can easily infer that the Hobbesian state of nature just simply does not make sense. It really only applies to states in general, I think.
There's a tremendous cost associated with getting into sort of like a tribal war. For instance, you might fucking die. So it seems kind of a stretch to say that property disputes would result in wars, especially in the not even getting into all the aforementioned problems with that perspective that we went over in the previous clip.
I remember seeing one of the comments in this video talking about how apparently, according to Yaron, the state is the only thing that's keeping us from just straight up murdering each other. How they managed to accomplish this, and how they managed to hire only people who will never abuse their power at all to achieve the rapacious bloodlust that people apparently have, that the state is ultimately stopping us from doing. It's like the moment the state collapses, like everyone's just going to pull out their Glocks and just start firing at random. And that the only reason that they do it is because like the state has mind control waves to like be civil, be civil, be civil, be civil.
I mean, last I knew, there's an entire group there's an entire sort of class in society that can just pull out their guns and shoot at people with impunity, and not only not ever have to pay any consequences for it, but usually they end up getting paid leave for it, and they exist only because the state does.
Yeah, more importantly, it gives those people, those psychopaths that have that desire to abuse and harm and kill, it gives them a way to exercise their rapacious bloodlust in a way that the state could decree to be legitimate. And it's also the same thing with other forms of people with predatory Machiavellian desires and instincts. If you're a child predator and you want to rape and abuse children, you become a teacher. If you're a cold-blooded killer, you become a cop. If you are incredibly Machiavellian and just want to control people and live at other people's expense, you become a politician. It just makes the most sense.
Even when I was a statist, I recognized that there was a problem with the Hobbesian state of nature, which was if state of nature is for people to be disorganized and to just kill each other, then how did they ever get together and form a state in the first place?
I mean, it's kind of hilarious, the example that Yaron Brook provided here, that, oh, if I'm just heavily armed, I'm just going to go over to your house and take what I want. I mean, it doesn't matter how heavily armed you are. A single round with the Liberator would take you out. And guess what? All your guns are mine. So naturally, when you're inflicting violence, as you said earlier, there is a tremendous risk and cost associated with violence, not just in terms of the risk of dying, but also the destruction of economic assets that could have otherwise enriched you in the future. Tremendous opportunity costs, to say nothing of collateral damage that might result from protracted warfare. So
I haven't gotten that response in a long time, but yeah, I'm just gonna come over to your house with a gun and take whatever I want. That it's a thinly veiled version of like the statist keyboard warrior, statists being keyboard warriors. No, you're not. I mean, first of all, you don't know whether or not I'm armed. And secondly, if you decided to do that, everybody else on the street would probably come after you for the sheer fact they don't want you going after them next.
Mm-hmm. I've actually started using that argument against statists, and you actually can when you point out that fundamentally they have no way of being able to defend themselves. If I were to say, break down their door with a rifle, gun down their families, and then rape and murder them, it's absolutely gruesome. But you can go one step further and point out that I'm not only going to do this, but I am going to tell you when I'm going to be there. I'm going to give you my rifle. I am going to go into your house. I'm going to tie up your family. You are going to shoot your own family. You will give me back my rifle, and then you will submit to your own raping and killing. It's mostly just a way to point out the extent to which the statist position attempts to conceptually refute the idea of self-ownership. And if you don't have self-ownership, then everything I described, where I can homestead you and control your behavior and do horrible things to you, is fundamentally, they have no way to be able to refute that. So it's kind of funny how people attempt to avoid confronting that point entirely. Also very telling, but it's also pretty useful, and it shows who's really interested in the discussion and who really isn't. But I mean, at that point, I'm kind of once I start making that argument, I kind of start losing my patience anyway. So yeah.
All right, should we continue?
Yeah, sure.
capitalism requires, in order for capitalism to exist, what is required is the elimination of coercion from human interaction. And coercive action, whether it's private or whether it's by government, needs to be eliminated. Now, there's no way
Now
to
who's the utopian?
It's kind of hilarious to hear him talk about capitalism as though it requires coercion to be eliminated, but we need a state to coerce people to obey capitalism.
How do you have why would you even have why would you even try to argue that you need security in that ideal society? I mean, for all coercion to be not just for it to be very difficult and for to make it so people can easily defend themselves from any potential aggression, but just for it to not exist. Wow, that's not even libertarians claim that. And I think it's, I don't know what's more absurd, that he's claiming you need a free market, or I mean, sorry, I misspoke. You need for there to be absolutely no coercion whatsoever for there to be a free market, or that he's attempting to argue that an organization which requires coercion to exist and which he wouldn't deny as an objectivist is needed in order for a society without coercion to exist. Objectivists, like, they openly argue the state's a monopoly on violence. They don't deny this. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I'm just reading a comment by J.C. Armitage because I think he put it pretty well. Coercion needs to be eliminated by using an organization that solely relies on coercion. Brainlet tier argumentation right there.
Yeah, like, what the fuck? How do you even rationalize something like that? Cognitive dissonance, outside of cognitive dissonance, which we know all statists suffer from.
It has to be. I mean, we've already established that Yaron Brook is very boomer, so it's entirely possible that he's just rationalized his own cognitive dissonance with I'm right, I'm right, I'm right, I'm right, I'm right. Actually, how old is he? I'm going to go check that out real quick.
Well, like I mentioned, I'm not even 100% sure like what he does. I just know that he has a show that people link clips from every once in a while in our Discord.
All right, so I'm looking on Wikipedia right now. He's an Israeli-American entrepreneur, writer, and activist. He is the current chairman of the board at the Ayn Rand Institute, where he was the executive director from 2000 to 2017. And he was born in 1961, so definitely boomer.
All right.
So yeah, that's what I think is that's what he does. He also has the Yaron Brook show, which I don't really know much about. I just know that it exists. And
this is a clip from.
Yeah, most likely. But yeah, I think we've talked about his cognitive dissonance enough. Should we continue?
Sure.
Eliminate private coercion without establishing a monopoly over the use of retaliatory force. And that monopoly is government. And if they don't like
a monopoly on retaliatory force. A monopoly on retaliatory force.
How do you know it's in retaliation, or how do you know what it's retaliating against is justified? Because it's a monopoly.
There's an idea that's even worse about that as well. What that implies is that it is literally illegal to defend yourself, ever.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what exactly? He's just saying it's a it's retaliatory force. Well, no, that's presupposing that the conclusion you're trying to argue is valid in your premise. That's just tautology. No, in reality, it's not retaliatory, and it's never going to be retaliatory because it requires the active use of force in order to sustain itself. Monopolies are defined by barriers to entry, i.e., using coercive means to either manipulate incentives implicitly to stop people from being able to compete with you, or by directly forcing them out of the market using violence, pointing guns at them.
I mean, in all fairness, there is very strong amount of precedent that the government would attempt to gain a monopoly on retaliatory force. I'm pretty sure people in our lifetime, or people in our audience as well as ourselves, have or know people who have attempted to defend themselves from school bullies during their time in government school. And the school administrator's response is, "You guys both get suspended."
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so bully punches you.
I'm sorry, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, bully beats the crap out of you on Monday, beats the crap out of you on Tuesday, beats the crap out of you on Wednesday, beats the crap out of you on Thursday. He attempts to beat the crap out of you. You swing your hand in his general direction, and the school administrators give you both 2-week suspensions.
Yeah, I'd imagine there are so many people who have like some form of low-key PTSD because of something like that.
I have so much I have so much personal hatred against the very idea of government schools because of my own personal experiences.
What do they call that policy? I can't recall off the top of my head.
Zero tolerance.
Yeah, zero tolerance. That's it.
Except it's not zero tolerance because they're extremely tolerant of bully violence. It's when you defend yourself, that's when it's wrong. And you can get this idea pretty clearly, or you can see this conveyed pretty early on whenever there's PSAs, school PSAs on violence and bullying, where if you see bullying, you just tell a teacher because, the authority figures are definitely going to know what to do and they're going to put a stop to it. Never defend yourself, never fight back, never make bullies second guess whether or not this nerd just happens to fight back or is going to fight back or not. Never make them hesitate. Never make them realize that maybe they have to operate on a peer-to-peer basis rather than attempting to project their own horrific experiences with parenting or with their parents onto people around them, because the only way they know how to interact with other people is through a dominant submissive relationship.
Yeah, that's because the point of that policy is not to try and stop people from bullying or being bullied. It's to try and make people dependent on authority, just like every other aspect of government schooling.
Mm-hmm. I find this whole anti-bullying thing, when it's done by state agencies in general, let alone by schools, to just be absolutely revolting. I mean, bullying made me suicidal in 5th grade. 5th grade! So yeah, I have a bit of a chip on my shoulder in regards to this issue.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, I've mentioned this before, but if it makes you feel any better, like I mentioned this on the Havoc stream. Yeah, I went about the same time. I went through some custody bullshit, and had to deal with not just the bad side of government schooling, but also the court system from a very young age. That's how even when I was a statist, I recognized pretty early on that something was fundamentally wrong with the state, and I didn't identify until I was about 18 that it was how it was organized, and the fact that it is a monopoly itself is going to always sort of innately cause this problem. with antagonistic incentives between the people running the government and the people who are not associated with political institutions in by any means. So I guess you could say that Heretic and I, Larkin Rose would describe it as instinctive anarchists. People who are anarchists but don't know it until they understand what the concept means.
I mean, that wasn't really the case at that particular point in time. Like, I've talked to you and others who are or were anarchists at very young ages. I think I only really became an instinctive anarchist around 2014, 2015. By that point, I was just completely disillusioned with the state, but my understanding of anarchism was basically they didn't exist. They weren't prevalent at the time, but Antifa, basically just the anarcho-communists who just wanted to create a Marxian superstate that would somehow achieve anarchy because magic. So it just kind of felt like take what you can get. And I was unironically making arguments like the voluntary taxes thing. I'm sure you've heard about that more than a few times.
Yeah, there was a very brief period between when I was a statist and basically when I started making videos on YouTube where I would have argued something similar. By very brief, I mean like we're talking about 2 weeks, maybe 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
That I guess that was just kind of trying to not only like cope with the ideological shift, but also attempting to understand anarchy.
Mm-hmm. Anyways, I think we should continue on this.
For sure.
I don't like the word government, call it something else. I don't care. But you need an institution, a human institution that actually excludes, and whose whole job is to make sure that people don't use force against one another. And if you don't do that, if you leave it so-called to competition, there is no competition, because when force is allowed, in a sense, and now is competed over, then the guy with the bigger gun wins, just like the guy with the best product wins. Right?
Yeah, he's doing it again where he's not explaining why like things would be organized this way or trying to justify his prescriptive analysis. He's just saying, well, these organizations would exist and they would do this and they would have this intention in mind. And of course, intentions are the only thing that matters when it comes to the state, but not with private courts and private security. Like, this is, I don't even know what you call this. This is pretty bad even for statists.
I'm quiet because I'm trying to figure out, like, how do you even respond to this? Because it sounds very much like he is operating under the assumption that security firms would just be like mixed security, very large corporations that would just have the most guns in any particular region, and that would be the only way that people would be able to defend themselves. Well, no, they wouldn't be able to defend themselves because Brook has already presupposed that defense of oneself and defense of one's property is completely impossible. And certainly he wants it to be illegal because he wants government to have a monopoly on retaliatory force.
Because I can tell you right now, Yaron, the state most definitely does not have an incentive to just defend people. It does within the state's framework. It doesn't even really have a coherent ability to know what defending someone is, because it has a unilateral standard of what rights are and whether or not something is a right is declared entirely by them. So from the perspective of an enforcer, they may very well be defending somebody, but they're actually aggressing against somebody. If we were looking at it from the the actual perspective of ethical principles.
Let's see here. Yeah, I'm sorry. Just that what he said is just so puzzling. It's
then when you factor in how states fund themselves and the fact that all state agencies and actors within the state have sort of uniform interests based around that model and that model requiring coercion. If we were just going to look at the model that the state is funded around and determine what its interests are and what it's going to do to sustain itself based around that, and there's really no rational case to be made that the state has any sort of recognized interest other than to try to keep people dependent on authority, to invest all their time and resources onto the state's political partners or the state directly, and to just use them as tax cattle. But anyway, unless you had anything else to say, I'm good.
Yeah, no, I'm just wondering if I should share my story of when I became completely disillusioned with government schools.
Sure, that sounds interesting.
All right, so I'm pretty sure I've told this story before, but this was like years ago before I even started streaming. And I meant to make a video about it a long ass time ago, but honestly, I wasn't satisfied with the script and never really got back to it. So I'm just gonna go ahead and tell it here. So this would have been in, I'm not gonna say the year, but it was an algebra class. And so, I'm at this point, and actually, I don't even think I'm a conservator at this point. I'm just like, I think I'm vaguely Republican, but I don't really know enough to like articulate anything that even I would consider to be an informed opinion. So it's kind of just a thing. But I noticed that one particular point, like how math classes are generally structured, where you learn one particular set of problems and then on to the next one, the next one, the next one, that kind of stuff. We move on to this one thing, this one set of problems. I can't remember what they're called for the life of me, but I do know they involve fractions. But I looked at it and it didn't make any sense to me. So although usually I can skirt by in these classes because I'm reasonably intelligent, I just follow along with what they're doing, and then I start to grasp it, and I can just do it without really having to do much. And I can just vibe in the class for the rest of the day. Well, this time it's just like it didn't make any sense whatsoever, the way that the teacher was explaining it. And so the teacher would ask, like, any questions? Yeah, I have one. What? And so she went over it again, and none of it made any sense to me whatsoever. All of it was basically just arcane runes to me. I looked around the class, and I don't know if they were faking it or I was just being a stupid person, because everyone else both looked like and claimed that they seemed to grasp it as well. And so she decided to. I was like sitting there like, oh my goodness, I'm going to get a very low grade in this class because I am at the point where I'm indoctrinated to value what an authority figure I don't really care about thinks about my academic performance. And as such, I'm getting worried in that regard. But she starts to do example problems. I'm trying to follow along, trying to figure out if there's something I'm not getting. It still doesn't make any sense whatsoever until she gives the answer. I look at that and go, wait a minute, that kind of makes sense based on the numbers and letters that I'm seeing on the board. So then I start pulling out my notebook, which I almost never use, and I decide to do the problems myself, but work backwards to try to figure out how to do this. And I'm just like, and what I end up doing is actually coming up with an entirely new way of doing these problems. I don't announce it at first because I was like, this can't be right. And so I do some of the example problems without looking at the board so I don't know the answers. Use this method that I effectively reverse engineered. And it's just like, oh my goodness, I figured this out on my own. it's an entirely new way of solving this math problem. And so the class ends. I come to the teacher just like, hey, check this out. I figured out this new way of being able to do these problems. And her response is, no, you have to do it this way. But that way doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I mean, what the hell is this? What the hell are these supposed to mean? Like, no, you have to do it this way. And because I had to, well, for dumb reasons, she didn't really give any reason whatsoever. It's just like, that's just how it's done. That's the way you're supposed to learn it. And keep in mind, this is before Common Core as well. So I can imagine it's gotten 1,000 times worse since I left. But
it's not Common Core. It's math classes have always been like that, and that's because math is an incomplete science. There's there's very inconsistent logic, especially in the higher order types of math, because higher order types of math, if you look at like the various set theories within them, they all operate around Platonic types of logic, where these things are just what they are because this is what they need to be in order to reach this conclusion. These principles are defined by this perfect intangible thing that hypothetically exists. I mean, no, seriously, look up explanations of the set theories, and it literally is like this.
But anyways, the story's not quite finished yet.
Oh, okay.
So I go do homework, and we do quizzes to try to figure out if we're understanding what's going on. I use my methodology, which is clearly a lot simpler, a lot more efficient, and allows me to get the correct answer a good percentage of the time. And when I don't get the answer, it's because I make a mistake. So, it's good. But I get points deducted because guess what? I didn't show my work enough. And so at some point and also more importantly, it's like when I take another quiz, I do show my work using the methodology that I detailed or that I came up with. And she still docks points because I did it wrong. I came up with the correct answer. I didn't cheat at all. I just used a different method and she still docked points. I dispute this. I even go to the board, like in front of the class. And keep in mind, even at this time, I'm a very shy person. So this kind of thing is just annoying me. I go up to the class and it's like, okay, look, here's an example problem that I made up off the top of my head. And here's my methodology. And I write it all out, explain it as clearly as I know how. I get the answer. And not only is the teacher responding like, well, you got the correct answer, but you still did it wrong. And the whole class is just like, yeah, you did it wrong. We understand this other methodology perfectly well. And I just can't help but think like, oh my God, these people have no idea what the fuck they're talking about. They're not here to teach me at all. They're here to frickin' indoctrinate me and put me into their own box of ultimately non-understanding. And at that point, like I actually come up with a way to semi-cheat on the tests where I would show just enough work based on my incredibly incomplete and incoherent understanding of the proper methodology just to make it look like I was using their method on the tests, but I was actually using my own. And yeah, that's basically just what I did. That's what happened.
Yeah, I'd imagine most of the people watching this stream, but if not, at least some people would probably be able to relate to that. And well, you're not dumb, or it's actually the more intelligent people I would imagine have a difficult time with math, and I'm not trying to like give you the sort of glue eater sympathy story. I mean, no, I didn't really have a great time with it myself, and that's I didn't mean for it to come off that way, but
no. I completely understand.
no, there's no internal logic to it whatsoever. It's literally just, here are these arbitrary things that are required in order to do math this way, and that's why we do it this way. So that's what the teachers are going to write down. Math in particular, there is from a fundamental level, math as a concept is structured to where there's no way for you to be able to follow it and reason it out on your own, because from a fundamental level, there's the principles mathematics is based on are they're all based on types of logic that don't have any sort of basis for them. They just kind of presuppose that their conclusions are true, or they essentially attempt to secularize the world of forms. So they're just true because they're true. So a lot of people are going to have a hard time with that, because people try to reason their way through things. You know, it's difficult to just turn your brain off and listen to an authority figure. People don't naturally operate that way, but you would have to do that in order to succeed in a math class.
Mm-hmm. And Kojal says that he has a story that's much more sinister than mine. If so, then do DM it to me on Discord. If you do that, I will read it on stream, because I'm kind of curious. If you want to share it but you don't want me to read it on stream, that's fine too. Just let me know in DMs. Anyway, should we continue?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I kind of segued off of that. Anyways.
Place. The way to solve problems is to outcompete your opponent. And if force is what we're competing about, then the way for me to outcompete my opponent is to have more force, is to have better weapons, bigger weapons, and to impose my will. You cannot have a marketplace, a function.
Yeah.
Oh, that was wasn't intentional, but I suppose it's kind of like, what are we talking about when we're saying that something has to be more forceful? That doesn't seem to really be a sound concept.
And even just the idea is just like, you continuously just have a series of escalations where one person uses bigger and more numerous weapons than the other. I'm pretty sure you're at least aware of the extent to which gigantic armies can be annihilated with very small but very precise applications of force. You can disrupt a rebellion just with a single sniper round, for an example.
Yeah, and we're assuming a whole host of things here. We're assuming that there is no limit to which an army can optimally scale, or a defense firm can optimally scale, when the scale of a firm is decided by the economy that it exists within. And since economies are always a very local thing, at least they would be without without prescription by the state. It seems very unlikely that they would ever be able to scale the way that Brooks is describing. Then there's also the assumption that, you know, violence is competitive, that violence is productive, and that's what, in an economic context, these firms could be competing over. Not just that they would, but since the thing with coercion is that at best it's parasitic. At worst, it's destructive for both parties. just by parasitic, I mean it destroys one party's resources, in order for the other party to gain, or appropriating one party's resources for the gain of another.
Hmm.
So there can't really be any competition for a model like that, because parasitic models aren't productive. So there's no economic process going on there.
It seems that, and I've kind of gotten a sense earlier, but I didn't say anything because I wanted to see where it was going, that he's not really thinking about economics. He's thinking about force as though it were an end unto itself. Yeah, sure, economics and questions of profit and loss are not necessarily ends to themselves, but force is something that is useful in terms of economics. So we can't ignore that. With this in mind, yeah, everything you said is completely accurate. That the use of force is fundamentally destructive. And in an economic sense, if you have firms that are using force versus firms that are not using force, just purely economically, assuming nothing else, the firm that is not paying for armies, for bases, for training, for equipment, for maintenance, and all of the other huge costs associated with maintaining armed forces, they're going to have a tremendous economic advantage over the ones that are paying for that all that crap. And even then, it's like that's ignoring the extent to which you use the military, in which case you're making yourself a target for destruction by other firms, in addition to loss of your own assets accrued through attrition, to say nothing of the disincentive other firms will have to associate with you for being, well, violent assholes.
Yeah,
So,
isn't it fun, the sort of things that you can argue when everything in social organization is prescribed, and its prescription is just an end unto itself? You don't have
mhm.
to justify anything anymore. The only thing that matters is intentions, because that's how lived reality works.
Oh, right. Yeah, I forgot. We're following the Marxist school of life, where everything and everything is entirely justified on the basis of, well, I just had good intentions. That's why I killed all of the old people, so that young
Kill
people don't have to
all
pay Social Security anymore. I just killed all of the old people.
Killed all the old people to save them from dying.
I swear, I just realized, I swear to God, this was not a jab at Yaron Brook. This is just a random example I thought of off the top of my head. And it goes without saying, I do not advocate for the killing of old people, especially including boomers. But
That should be
yeah,
obvious.
but it's just that's the context of who we're talking about. This will easily be construed as a threat against Yaron Brook. I have no ill intent towards the man. So just to clarify that. And I know this is a little older, but I like what the Gray in the Field said. Wouldn't an army be subject to the diseconomies of scale? Yes, and that's
I
what we were talking about earlier.
just pointed that out a moment ago.
Hmm.
The
It's an older comment, so you probably didn't mention it yet.
worst case scenario, the army would just scale upwards to where it has a monopoly, and then immediately fall apart because it has no way of externalizing its maintenance costs at that point.
Hmm. I'm just saying, like, the Walmart security force is going to do everything it can to maintain the existence of the Walmart security force. So even in a time period where the Walmart security force is no longer necessary to maintain the interests of Walmart, they're still going to find a justification to continue their existence, and not to mention to increase their own budgets. This isn't something that's unique to them either. This is kind of the situation with bureaucratization in general, where every single branch, department, and organization firm is going to want to enrich themselves and do whatever they can to justify their own existence. So,
All
with this
right.
in mind, yeah, I don't know if there's much more to say. Should we continue?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
It's a functioning marketplace. You cannot have the idea of property rights enforced without an institution that eliminates the use of force, and that is called government. So I think it's a fantasy, but really what it is it's a consequence of philosophical subjectivism. Who is somebody?
It's a consequence of philosophical subjectivism, by which I'm assuming he means relativism. All I have to say in response to that is, yeah, come on. you're the objectivist here.
You're literally an egoist, and you have the temerity to call anarcho-capitalism a subjectivist, relativistic philosophy. Now, certainly, there are a lot of self-proclaimed ANCAPs that are relativists and subjectivists. That's absolutely true. Especially, well, since anarcho-capitalism is so broad enough that it includes Kantians and it includes nihilists. So, in that respect, yes, but it's also kind of the pot calling the kettle black in a way. It's really hard to take that seriously as a form of criticism coming from him, who is definitely a philosophical subjectivist. Oh, but he calls himself an objectivist, so therefore he's a philosophical objectivist. Yeah, that's like saying that Hans Hermann Hoppe is an anarchist because he calls himself an anarchist.
That's that same type of argument. Well, no, he says that his government would just protect people. So obviously he's different.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's so different than every single tyrant throughout history. Everyone always imagines themselves to be the hero of their own story. No one ever. I'm pretty sure everyone. I don't know where I was going with that.
Everyone who is arguing for authoritarianism sees themselves as being the privileged party of whatever authoritarian system they want to see established.
Mm-hmm. Nobody envisions themselves to be the enslaver. They envision themselves to be the liberator.
Well, in Yaron Brook's case, I think given his background, that probably is. It's probably not a stretch to say that he likely does picture himself being one of the top entrepreneurs of Gold's Gulch. So
Probably. Though I'm curious as to hear how this guy would respond to me making the claim that the Holocaust was justified. Remember,
yeah,
he's an
I'd love to
Israeli.
hear that.
He's an
I'd love to
Israeli
hear that.
American. I have very good reason to believe that he's a Jew, and so I'd very much actually no, I know he's a Jew because Wikipedia has his original name written in Hebrew. I'm not going to try to read it. I don't know how to read that script, but yeah, I would like to see him attempt to conceptually refute the idea of the Holocaust as legitimate. I don't think he can because he would fundamentally have to appeal to preferences.
Just realized I said Gold's Gulch. I meant Galt's Gulch. What the fuck am I talking?
I was actually thinking you were making an anti-Semitic joke for a moment.
No, I was referencing Atlas Shrugged.
That's what I thought. Anyways, let's continue here. As soon as I can find the thing. There it is.
Somebody else to decide when use of force is legitimate. If you deny objectivity, if you deny objective law, if you deny objective truth, then it's all about my emotion, my feelings. And I want to be able to protect my property rights the way I want to protect it, when I want to protect it. And I want to be able to determine when you're violating my property rights. To hell with some objective court system. To hell with some means of objectivity. We don't have a marketplace in science. Science is not competitive in the sense of, in the same way as products are. There's a different type of way in which we resolve scientific disputes, primarily through proof, through showing you in reality that it's true. And and that is the way in which science develops. We have a separate institution.
I have no objection to anything that he's saying right now. It's just, this is an argument against him, not for the case that he's making. Although, yeah, I would object to him arguing that in the presence of competition, you can't have objectivity. Well, no, that's precisely the opposite of the truth. That when we're talking about ethics, the only way that you can have anything even approaching an ethical society is if everyone was able to defend their rights on a somewhat level playing field, and you were to get rid of all these barriers to entry.
I'm just reminded of a. Give me a second here. I'm going to try to pull it up. Is it working? Good enough. I'm just reminded of this. I don't know if you would call it a prequel meme. It's a scene from Star Wars Rogue One in the beginning, with director Krennic saying, "We were on the verge of greatness. We were this close." Because Brook here is hitting all the right notes. It's just that, he's a statist.
And it's not even that he's close to being right. He's dead on here. It's just, why does he think this is an argument for the state?
Because magical government thinking. I mean, the reason I say that reason I say like he's close is because he, as I said, he hit all the right notes. He just can't take that to its logical conclusion and recognize that any conclusions, any claims, including the existence of the state, need to be proven. And given the state's inability to do this without appealing to, subjectivity and preference, that he fundamentally has no ability to justify the existence of the state whatsoever. If by some miracle we were to deceive Yaron Brook into having a discussion with myself or both of us, I would very much like to hear him attempt to answer this. But I know he's not going to. He's just going to use some boomer cognitive dissonance justification that he uses to allow himself to sleep and to allow himself to feel okay about being thought of as an intellectual by other people.
Yeah, just what I was going to say is this is sort of what I was touching upon earlier, where this sort of political view of society is where there are no sort of objective principles for observing social organization. And everything is just sort of a policy dictated by the state that benefits one group at the expense of another. That causes people to exist essentially in a dissociative reality. Specifically, one of the worst things that it does is it causes people to operate in these frameworks like Yaron Brook Brooks is here, where from his perspective, the only thing that he can make ought claims without having to justify those assumptions about society and about how, from his perspective, the state should function. It's just those are in his interests, therefore he's going to argue for it, because the state is just a tool to festoon your interests at the expense of others. Because that's how things work. and you can't question that, because otherwise they're ironically, I guess in Brooks's case, he's ironically going to call you a relativist.
Hmm. He's going to try, but this is kind of something that I've observed statists been doing even while I was a statist, where they'll make claims to scientific reason, objectivity, while at the same time being doing everything they can to undermine any notion of scientific objectivity or truth. A good example of this, which is something I've noticed for over a decade now, is climate change and the extent to which truth is apparently demonstrable entirely by consensus. That just because all these scientists agree. I'm sorry?
Science is settled, heretic.
Ah, frick.
all
If the
the
science is
scientists-
settled, if the science is settled, then
all of the scientists TM would disagree with you.
well, I mean, if all the scientists say so, then they must be correct. Yeah, so there's not really much more to say about that other than I can imagine that like if they festoon themselves with the title of objectively true and objective reality, then it's going to be very difficult for them to kind of break through that mold and break through seeing that, maybe there are gaps in our reasoning. It's going to take a bit of patience, I'll say that much. And I will admit that I really don't have patience to deal with boomers anymore. So I'm really not sure if I would be interested in being in a debate with this guy under entirely false pretenses. And I have to say under false pretenses because I would have to lie to him and say that I am a minarchist or like some other like LP libertarian, just so he would be interested in debate because he really. I think we said it in the beginning of the stream that he says he does not want to debate anarchists because he believes that debate is just simply a way of validating another person's ideas as though they were legitimate, which is hilarious when he's debated Marxist-Leninists and literal self-proclaimed fascists.
Yeah, that is just a nice way of him saying he doesn't want to debate because he knows that he would get spanked by even a basic anarchist.
Well, he did get spanked by a basic anarchist, didn't he?
Woods, yeah. They weren't even debating about political authority. I think that's the only reason that even happened.
It's great, and yes, Jeff Anson, I think that's how you pronounce it. The state is a sort of spiritual entity of evil, like Satan, but it's Satan. It's an organic type of evil of the earth, like God is in heaven, and the state is on earth or of the world. Yes, I think that's actually the case, and the Bible actually does allude to this quite a bit. Not only in the First Samuel, where God specifically warns the prophet about what's going to happen if people or Israel accepts a king, which is exactly what happens, or when Satan tells Jesus that the world and all of the dominion of it is his to distribute to whomsoever he sees fit, and he will give it all to Jesus if he just bows down and worships him being Satan. So yeah, I do think that the state is genuinely satanic. It's certainly based on lies, and the Satan is the Lord of Lies. I know this is kind of talking about Bible stuff that you're not terribly interested in, but I just wanted to talk about the comment because I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, I'm not particularly well read I'm not particularly well read about the scripture, but just from the outset I have sort of the same problems with the Bible as I would with the concept of the Constitution, where even if we're not even like this doesn't even really have to do with the concept of whether or not religion is justified. It's just that there's no way to argue that one interpretation of the Bible or a biblical passage is more valid than another. So I kind of have, like, when people point to the Bible as having a coherent specific interpretation, I'm gonna sort of press X to doubt just from the outset.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
But anyway, should we continue?
Yes.
Institution for science, a lab at a university that is not necessarily guided, that research is not necessarily guided by the same principles as, I don't know, competition for a smartphone. And the same is true of law. Law is a science. To define property rights correctly is not an issue of competition. It's an issue of proof. It's an issue of figuring out. It's an issue of experts figuring out. And the institution designed in order to do that is government. And unfortunately,
the institution designed to figure out what the truth is about property rights is government. Government, if you recall, is not an institution. It's actually a form, it's actually a mode of social interaction, specifically the kind of social interaction where the victim pays for their own victimization. So I might be missing something here. Maybe this is like 200 IQ, big-brained objectivist logic that I just can't comprehend with my 134 IQ small brain. But I don't see the connection between a form of social interaction where the victim pays for their own victimization and how it is that you acquire truth about property rights.
Of course, the only way that claims about property could be objective is for property to exist in a framework where property is entirely arbitrary, and where the only thing that defines property and makes property claims valid is whether or not one organization says so.
Mm-hmm. And we talked about this before, earlier in the stream, where, what is it, that you can't really claim to have property rights whatsoever under any state possible, because all states, by merely existing, are going to engage in the actions of taxation and warfare. So they're already, by merely existing, making a claim to property that you legitimately own, and making a claim that they can destroy your property for any reason they wish at any point in time, if for whatever conditions they see fit, such as resisting, for example. So
yeah, if a better way of looking at it would be if the state legally would define a certain resource as property, or a certain way of going about showing that you are claiming that resource as being a just claim. What that translates to roughly is that the state isn't, at least for any particular reason, going to come after you for acting upon resources that way. Or they may defend you if you're lucky, or if they find it to be in their interests to do so, from somebody trying to take to destroy those resources or take them from you. You may or may not have a right to those resources, but again, since property is entirely arbitrary from the legal positivist perspective, it means that you could claim you have a property right to things which aren't even scarce resources, which is why I used the idea of IP earlier. So something that they're really, in the absence of a state, it wouldn't even really be coherent to argue that that's a property claim, because ideas are not scarce. But anyway, just getting back to what I was saying. Yeah, if you homesteaded some land and the state decided that it wasn't your land. They were going to use eminent domain to take it from you. There's absolutely nothing within the legal framework of that society you could do to defend yourself. If you tried, the state would fucking just try and use more violence against you for trying to defend yourself. There's no way to contest that within the state's legal framework. So to argue that that's a society where property norms exist. I mean, clarify, just, yeah, you always have a right to property. It's just that in this extremely unethical society we have, your rights are going to go molested, almost certainly.
You already have all of the rights that we've identified in numerous occasions, multiple times. It's just that right now governments do everything they can to inhibit people's ability to exercise and defend their rights, even going so far as to throw people in cages and kill them should they defend them in ways that the state did not arbitrarily approve of. I mean, the way I see it, and I do believe this unironically, and I think I'll be making a video about it in the near future. We already live under anarchy. It's just that the state is a criminal organization that prevents people from being able to exercise their rights and creates too many distortions in the economy that any economy could be recognized as even resembling anything that would otherwise exist in the absence of the government.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with that, and I've heard that sentiment expressed elsewhere before by people like James Corbett, for instance. He wrote, he uploaded an episode of his podcast where he was making that point, and it wasn't until, I'd say, within the last couple months that I truly understood it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that goes over a lot of people's heads. It went over mine for the longest time.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially the point is that the state, there's no such thing as a state society. Societies are not characterized by the state. A society that has a state is not, in any sort of theological sense, any different than a society without one. State is just an organization that exists within society. I think that's an important thing for people to understand, because it makes it sort of necessary then to see the state as something that needs to be undermined and done away with, rather than something that people are just kind of helpless against because it's the characterizing influence of their quote unquote society.
Mm-hmm.
It sort of decides what societies are. It's also important to recognize this because if you're looking at societies as being characterized by one particular organization, even if you're a self-proclaimed anarchist, then you don't really understand anarchy. Because if you're looking at societies as though there's something imposed from the top down, and conventions in social organization as though they're sort of outside of, they're not determined by the people who organize within them, that's not necessarily an authoritarian argument, but it does negate the concept of moral agency. So you wouldn't really have any basis to argue against political authority and for the libertarian view of social organization, because those entail moral agency and that methodologically dualist approach to what informs a society.
Mm-hmm. And there's other implications. Like, I've kind of understood the idea for a while, but I haven't really like thought through on what the conclusion that we already live under anarchy, what that entails. And I've come to a couple of very interesting conclusions that I'm kind of chomping at the bit to really get into in that video. Perhaps the most interesting one that I came up with is that I don't think states actually exist. And we can probably talk about that after the stream, but I think I have a pretty good reason to come to that conclusion. I think we should actually stop using that term altogether.
Yeah, I'd be more than willing to talk about that after the stream, because that's some 200 plus IQ galaxy brain stuff right there.
All right, well, at least hopefully my reasoning makes sense. But anyways, I think we should get back to the video.
Never structured a government good enough. The experiment has always been flawed. But okay, that isn't a sign that we should give up. That's a sign that we need to continue to refine our ability and improve our ability to design good government. And to have good government, Ayn Rand argued, you have to have a good philosophy. You have to have the right principles. And until we convince the world of our principles, there's no point too much in talking about government.
So, in other words, what you need are philosopher kings.
Yep. And that's what we were just talking about this earlier. That's something that relativism will always sort of devolve into. Hot statements, but you can't explain why. In other words, secularization of the world of forms.
Mm-hmm. It's I mean, are they even going to explain what their principles are and how it is that they got to them?
I don't know. I didn't make it this far into the video when I was watching before the stream.
Okay, that's fair. But I just find this silly.
It is, and I'm not entirely sure if there's anything else to go over. It would surprise me, because I've listened to his takes before, and I've listened to the takes of other objectivist types before, and this basically is the argument that they have against anarchy and libertarianism, and oh boy, is it not a good one.
It's
As
not.
far as
They don't understand anarchy at all.
yeah. But as just what I was gonna say is, I mean, as far as statist takes go, I'd say it's probably like mid tier. I mean, there's no such thing as a good statist argument, because they all fail in some way. But considering that most of them don't even address what libertarians are claiming about society, the fact that this one is at the very least kind of agnostic on it, it could be addressing it, just not very well. That sets it ahead of a lot of the other statist arguments by default.
Oh, and by the way, I sent you a thing.
All right. Oh. Did somebody send that to you, or did you make that while we were streaming?
Someone actually made it and posted it, or the Fox made it and posted it in memes.
Oh, nice.
Should I show it?
Yeah, for sure.
I'll have to save it. You'll have to give me a minute or so.
People to make art for us.
Yeah, just give me a minute here. It's a multi-step process of saving it to my computer, and then I gotta. Why isn't this working? There it goes. Yeah, I'm just gonna start making random noises just so we don't have dead air. But it's almost done. All right, there. Oh, that's way too big. Yeah, there we go.
Arrogant boomer noises. See, that's the thing with a lot of the. This guy is sort of, he's not Dunning-Kruger levels of lacking self-awareness. You know, usually I can tell what type of statist arguments if I'm like watching a video by a statist or reading something written by a statist. You can usually tell what kind of argument it's going to be based on the tone that they're approaching the discussion in. The really smug, arrogant ones, ironically, tend to be the ones that make the dumbest arguments, that do the least to actually address what libertarians are saying. But this is like a mid-tier statist argument, so he isn't quite Dunning-Kruger levels of arrogant, but at the same time, he definitely doesn't. From his perspective, he thinks that he's like, there's just no way anyone's going to be able to address this quote unquote problem that he's found, even though many people have in many different ways.
Mm-hmm. It's not much different than what we've seen before. Although I do have to make one criticism of this meme, and that is the redundancy in using the term arrogant before boomer. I mean, I would think that putting boomer there would explain arrogance enough.
Yeah, for sure.
So, anyways, I think we should continue. Let me just get rid of that.
Yeah, boomer is an attitude, not a generation. I mean, I know there's a generation called boomers, but let's be honest, we're not talking about the generation. In fact, a lot of the time, people who are referred to as boomers are Gen Xers. So,
I mean, I'm going to be completely honest. I hardly know any. I don't think I've met any boomer that wasn't, a boomer.
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess we'll use the term sad relatively, but that generation's dying out. I mean, there's like barely any silent generation. There's barely any of the silent generation left. So, the boomers are going to be going out the door pretty quickly after that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's referring more to an attitude at this point than it is the generation of people. Anyway,
yeah, let me just say that the silent generation are cool, and they will be missed.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyways, continuing.
The first thing is to get the principles right.
What we need today, what I call the new intellectual, would be any man or woman.
Oh my God! Did he actually play a clip of Ayn Rand?
He's currently playing a clip of Ayn Rand.
He couldn't even make his own argument. He asked. He had a clip on standby of his of waifu Rand backing him up.
Yeah, I don't think it's a. He had it on standby. I think it was just this is a clip from his show. Yeah, he just edited it in. So let's continue. Let's see what. Let's see what.
Sure.
Let's see what his Russian waifu has to say.
The thing, meaning any man or woman who knows that man's life must be guided by reason, by the intellect, not by feelings, wishes, whims, or mystic revelations. Any man or woman who values his life and who does not want to give in to today's cult of despair, cynicism, and impotence, and does not intend to give up the world to the dark ages and to the rule of the collectivist brutes.
I just want to point out, though, that it's off the screen now, but I wanted to point out, aside from the fact it has that Facebook boomer caption at the top, that like Facebook clips have.
Hmm.
That Ayn Rand, that the argument is laughably, like, we're talking about utopianism, but this argument that's being presented is we're going to change the culture by debating people and telling them how stupid and wrong and how backwards their stupid beliefs are, make everyone into an objectivist.
And for those of you wondering, the way that that's the actual video, it's not like poorly cropped or anything. Yes, I do crop the videos, but only so like play bars and crap aren't visible and obnoxious. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure what's going to be coming up from here. Should we continue?
Sure, I guess.
Although that Ayn Rand clip was,
That's the argument. It was so important from Ayn Rand that he had to clip it into his little segment from his show.
that people need to be.
Let's debate these stupid people and change their minds.
The
That's the grand wisdom from Waifu Rand that was so important that it needed to be put into this clip about what were you gonna say? I'm sorry.
is the great wisdom that people need to be guided by intellect and reason and not feelings.
Oh yeah,
That
is basically what objectivists think.
I mean, I'll admit I haven't looked into objectivism all that much, but there's got to be more to it than that. Like a lot more, because that's just a very vague statement, and it's one that's very. What the hell does intellect mean? What do feelings mean?
Like I said, I probably could read Rand a bit more than I have. If that wasn't made clear by my attempt to explain the rational egoist method, but yeah, it just from the outset, I can't imagine that it's any more sophisticated than this, or any attempt to further explain it would fundamentally change what's being put forward here. But yeah, this sounds like a child's explanation of social organization almost. Incentives, what are those? People revealed preferences after people associate with one another. Dialectics, those don't exist. That's just or at the very least, if they exist, those don't matter. You know what does matter? Debating with people and wrecking their dark age collectivism with sick facts and logic.
Which is actually a perfect way to segue into what I sent you in DMs.
Yeah, Kojul Tad. Yaron Brook vaporized thousands of Japanese people with facts and logic.
I didn't want to read it on stream. I wanted you to read it for yourself, which is why I sent you like a cropped screenshot of it.
I wanted to read it. It's funny as fuck.
Excuse me, I got something in my throat. Anyways, should we see where this is going?
Kicking Native American people off their lands with facts and logic.
Beautiful. Anyways,
Yeah,
let's continue.
Sure,
We go on. Reminder, please like the show. We've got 163 live listeners right now, 30 likes. That should be at least 100. I figure at least 100 of you actually like the show. Maybe there are like 60 of the Matthews out there who hate it, but at least the people who are liking it, I want to see a thumbs up. There you go. Start.
The Matthews? That must be a reference to his show that I don't get.
Yeah, and I mean, we've asked people to rate our videos before, but he's asking people to give him likes specifically.
Which I understand. I mean, it's completely understandable because more highly rated videos tend to, and I mean,
Yeah.
more highly rated videos, not just like in terms of more likes, but also more dislikes. You're more favored on the algorithm. So, anyways,
Yeah,
yeah,
when I started saying that, for whatever reason, like my mind was equating that to when Jeb Bush was telling the audience to applaud for him.
please clap.
Please applaud. I think it was no, it's please clap. But yeah, no, it's probably just to boost his content in the algorithm. So never mind, I guess.
Yeah, completely understandable. I was just wondering what the Matthews reference was. It's probably an inside joke. I don't get it. Anyways, continuing.
Like
Like I
I want to
said,
support whatever,
I haven't watched enough of his content to like be too familiar with his views. I've seen and heard enough to know, so he has some pretty nuclear takes on stuff. Um, but yeah, let's continue.
all it takes is a click of a thing. Whether you're looking at this, and the likes matter. It's not an issue of my ego. It's an issue of the algorithm. The more you like something, the more the algorithm likes it. So
Yeah, there you go.
If you don't
That's what I just
like the
said.
show, give it a thumbs down. Let's see your actual views being reflected in the likes. But if you like it, don't just sit there. Help get the show promoted. Of course, you should also share. And you
Wait,
can
is the rest of
support
the video
show
just this?
at yaronbrookshow.com/. And
Yeah, I think so.
Is that what you?
This is just a 2-minute outro. I mean, I'm pretty sure you've seen like those Minecraft Let's Plays of those people with just like the unnecessarily long intros.
Yeah.
This kind of feels like that, except it's for an outro. Which, to his credit, like having that like backloaded, it's better. But
Should focus more on his intro if he cares about the algorithm, because audience retention is a big factor in deciding how well a video does in the algorithm. And if you put something gets people hooked in the first 10 seconds, that sort of retains their attention for a bit longer. Anyway, so what did you have anything else to say, or I don't feel like I have anything to add to any of this.
not really. It feels like we went through just about everything that this guy has to say. Although Eclipse Nation asks, Rothbard or SEK3?
Oh, Konkin for sure.
Yeah,
I mean,
Konkin.
I have a lot of respect for Rothbard, particularly his early work, which actually defines the Rothbardian view. Like, don't think for a moment I don't have any respect for Rothbard. In fact, Konkin's views are expansion upon Rothbard, specifically in the realm of praxis and what his principles entail. But yeah, I would have to say that Konkin's the better theorist because, first of all, Rothbard was only like out of his well-known materials, so like the mid 1960s and onwards, there's only really a couple of essays that they put out, and those were the important ones that kind of defined the libertarian movement and the modern libertarians' view of ethics, property, etc. But there was a very short span of time where he was very consistent in his views. He joined the Cato Institute in the early 70s, and you could see in his writings around the time that started, whether it was interests he developed because he was involved with Cato, um, or it was he joined Cato due to, for whatever reason, him getting it into his head that politics was the only way that you could undermine the state. He started making a lot of inconsistent arguments around the time, and he started sort of backpedaling on a lot of his important additions to ethics and property. Although a lot of his arguments remained the same. It's just that he started downplaying like what these things entailed and why he started putting forward weaker arguments for why they were true. Then along came the 1980s after Konkin had established a presence in the libertarian movement. And Rothbard wrote his reply to Konkin. That was the first real time that I would say that was the first thing that I could think of off the top of my head that I think is actively contemptible, because as Konkin pointed out in his reply to Rothbard, Rothbard went against his own principles in order to try and defend the points that he was against agorism and against the things Konkin addressed in the New Libertarian Manifesto. But yeah, then he got involved with Hoppe and started promoting Hans Hermann Hoppe, which Heretic and I have gone over pretty extensively. And recently I read a reply that Rothbard wrote to Ludwig Lochmann, who I don't know if a lot of you are familiar with, but he was I think he's one of the most underappreciated figures in the Austrian intellectual canon. And some of the things he introduced are very important expansions upon the theory. But Rothbard attempted to write a reply to Lochmann and discredit his work, and that was just absolutely embarrassing. I'd be embarrassed if I was Rothbard and I wrote that.
Well, I'm not familiar with what he wrote, so what did he say?
He attempted to. So this would only really make sense if you understood Lochmann's approach, but Lochmann was very skeptical of a lot of the. He was an Austrian thinker himself, but he was very skeptical with a lot of Austrian thinkers because Austrians had started relying on things like general equilibrium models, where it's kind of assumed that there is a sort of structured framework for a market, and firms operate around knowledge that other firms have within them. Whereas Lochmann sort of followed Menger and Bomberwerk and Mises to a lesser extent and proposed an interesting approach to equilibrium theory, that the equilibrium is actually calculated internally within firms. Then there's also how a lot of Austrians began using cardinal models of measuring. So like time, scale being measured, what is being measured, and for like what reason is being determined by the model and is being like sort of prescribed onto the market, as opposed to it being revealed by consumer choice. So basically it's stuff that when explained, it is kind of obvious from the perspective of the praxeologue, but when you look at how the Austrian methodology, at least in the sort of Mises Institute at fee circles, are attempting to explain it, it's been kind of diluted, and Lochmann, along with Lochmann's followers like Michael J. Hoffman, attempt to follow Mises and the earlier thinkers before Mises, and Rothbard's response to that essentially was that this is a nihilistic approach. And by what he meant by that is there's no way that you could argue for economic principles from that perspective. Basically, taking the mainstream normative econ criticism of praxeology in general and attempting to apply that to Lockman's work.
All right.
So basically negating the concept of Austrian methodology just to take a shot at somebody who is expanding upon who is expanding upon the methodology. And I have a very strong feeling that the reason Rothbard did that is because Lockman's methodology made it kind of explicitly clear that economies themselves are determined by economic actors. So his idea of a prescribed community covenant would be contradicted by that. The idea of politics determining societies, or national economies existing in general, would be contradicted by this.
All right, and here's a comment by Jeff Anson. Is it ethical as a libertarian to interfere with national commons? The Koch brothers claimed to be libertarians, but they imported foreign nationals that taxed our commons.
What are you talking about?
I don't know. This is a question that was in our comments.
Commons, I assume that that's an attempt to use equivocation to both equate common ownership in the sense that I described earlier, a resource that exists in a state of null ownership because acting upon it would be aggressing against someone else's property, and collective ownership in the sense of within social contract theory, something owned by the state is quote unquote collective ownership. And obviously that's incoherent, but I also want to clarify that that's not what I'm referring to when I'm referring to a common resource.
It seems to me that English is not his first language, so what I think he's trying to ask is questioning if it's ethical for if it's ethical to import people from foreign countries to work in your factories and stuff when they benefit from taxes, the foreign nationals do, and therefore you as your organization benefits from taxes because when they receive welfare, then that means you don't have to pay a higher wage for them. So basically you're importing cheap labor for yourself as paid for by the state, which is of course paid for with taxes. So that's what I think he's trying to say.
Well, obviously, it's obviously being an actor in the political market is not compatible with a free society. But what I would question is whether or not, what I would argue is that it's not the white market actor is not coercing the laborer in that situation, because the conditions which are forcing people to associate in that model are imposed onto them by the state. So I think that's a bit of it's a falsely framed question.
I think it's just poorly worded. I think it's just poorly worded.
Also, we have to note that the white market for labor, by which I mean the labor market within the state's political framework, that's not the only labor market that exists. So if somebody moves within the territory claimed by the United States government, they're not necessarily working in the white market. In fact, they can't legally work in the white market.
Hmm.
If they come here, without the state claiming that they can.
Well, there is a system in the white market in the States called the H-1B visa program, where if you are
Yeah.
sponsored by a white market firm, for example, Koch Industries, as a worker, then you can be brought in as kind of a backdoor through the legal immigration process, and you are a legal resident in that country. And
Well,
that is
sure,
something like a lot of big companies like Koch Industries do.
yeah, but that requires the state to work with one of the state's political partners in order to do that. So the state has to know about it, and the state has to from their perspective, has to benefit from it
Hmm.
somehow.
Yeah. And here's a question from Carthanasi. Did y'all seriously make a stream debunking a philosophy you admit you don't understand? No, this wasn't a objectivism debunked stream. This is just
Yeah,
a response to some specific statements that Yaron Brook made in a specific video, and should not be taken as a general refutation of objectivism specifically. If we decide to do that,
we're responding to Yaron Brooks's argument against libertarianism and anarchy. Also, I understand objectivism. I'm just not very well versed in how it's argued. So,
yeah, it goes without saying that if we are going to do a debunking of objectivism, it'll be in video essay format, and it'll be significantly more thorough than the points that we made on the stream.
I'm never going to make a stream attempting to quote unquote debunk any concept. In fact, I wouldn't even make a video attempting to debunk something. I don't like titling videos with things like this philosophy debunked. Maybe I would say that about an argument, but no, that I think that is a bit of a disingenuous question, but okay.
I think it's just a bit of a misunderstanding and maybe some miscommunication. I'm not sure with who.
Sure. I'll
But
give them the benefit of the doubt and assume that.
yeah, I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So you got anything else to say before we close off the stream?
Not particularly. I think that we've said everything that we could. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll be streaming again Saturday or Sunday like we usually do.
We usually stream on Friday.
Oh, wait, what?
We usually stream on Friday.
We usually stream on the Saturdays, but okay.
Well, all right. We'll see what we do. It'll be Friday or Saturday. We'll just say that. All right. So yeah, the Koch brothers, not actual libertarians. They're Libertarian Party supporters. They operate in the white market. They're parasites and rent seekers that benefit off of the state apparatus. And well, yeah.
Onken pretty extensively criticized them and refuted their presence in the libertarian movement in the New Libertarian Manifesto.
Mm-hmm. Anyways, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up the stream here. Thank you everyone for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.